Welcome to Mythic Tales of Hope by the Elven Scholar. Please feel free to grab a spot by the fire while we recall tales from the elves and Fee, stories of hope and adventure, shrouded in the mists of legends within the depths of time. Together we can explore our past and reawaken the stories of old.
Megavan and my elven, fae, and otherkin family. This week we're delving into the legends of Camelot. Last week I told you that we were going to go a little bit deeper into Sir Lancelot and what he really meant for all of us. So we touched on a little bit last week, and so as I promised, I'm going to go into greater detail today. We're going to play an audio clip from a wonderful YouTube channel called Octagram Stories, and this one is called Sir Lancelot, the Early Origin of the Story. Sir Lancelot stands out for, I'd like to think, most of us as the epitome of knighthood, the epitome of chivalry, honesty, integrity, something that we definitely could use that kind of hope for nowadays. We need to see that even if it's in a story, that this can happen, that it can be imagined. And as an old philosophy goes, it says, if you can imagine it, it can be real. And so we'd like to believe that it is possible for someone to be so chivalrous, so honest and high in integrity that they will not bend on their ethics. Now, unfortunately, we know with the story of Lancelot, he did bend on his ethics, I could say, but at least he did it for love, and maybe that was the path that they were meant to take, and maybe it's because a human wrote this story, who can say. But again, he still stands out for us as the pinnacle of integrity and honesty, and for him, it didn't matter what others thought, but this was the path that he was meant to walk, and to stand as an example, as that light in the darkness of integrity. So it's a beautiful story, and we're going to go ahead and listen to it here for a little bit, and then when we get back, we're going to go ahead and go deeper into the legends and stories of Camelot. It's pretty neat to know that there does appear to have actually been a King Arthur and a Camelot, and that maybe there is some truth to all these stories. So anyway, let's go ahead and get a little bit deeper into the subject of Sir Lancelot. I hope you enjoy it. Be right back.
There is no doubt that most of us, in our childhoods and later in life, heard all about the stories and legends of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. For many, the stories of Arthur and his exploits were the integral part of growing up, and they continued to be the central aspect of what is a quintessentially British identity. But today, we won't be focusing on King Arthur. Instead, our story shifts to one of his closest companions, a knight equally dashing and brave, whose legend is the central part of the Arthurian legend, Sir Lancelot. Depicted as one of the most gallant and brave of all the Knights of the Round Table, Lancelot of the Lake is considered the epitome of that traditional, chivalric romance that served as an inspiration and an ideal to many over the centuries. The early origins of the story of Lancelot. The earliest mentions of the character of Lancelot are positively dated to the early decades of the Middle Ages. The earliest known literary work that features Lancelot as a prominent character is known as Erec and Enide, Erec et Enide, written in 1170 AD by the medieval French poet and troubadour Christian de Troyes. He is widely regarded as one of the most important authors of medieval literature and the Arthurian legend, and is also credited with most likely creating the characters of Lancelot, the Knight of the Cart, Vane, the Knight of the Lion, and Percival, the Knight of the Grail. It is possible that his works, which were highly novel for the time, popularized the early form of the novel and gave a major rise in popularity of the Arthurian romance. After first appearing in the said work, where his name is included with those of Knightscone and Erec, Lancelot continues to appear as an increasingly important figure in Christian's future works. Later on, with the publishing of Lancelot, the Knight of the Cart, this knight becomes the main protagonist of his own story. Christian de Troyes' work is also the first to name him as Lancelot du Lac, Lancelot of the Lake, which was later picked up by other authors both in France and in England, establishing the name in various forms. Now, scholars who have been struggling to find the truth before the historical authenticity of both Lancelot and King Arthur, placed a great deal of attention on this medieval work. Troyes wrote his story without focusing on Lancelot's background too much, as if his readers were already well familiar with this hero. This serves as a possible proof that the legend of Lancelot existed even before this work was written. One of the leading scholars on the subject of medieval French literature, Mathilde Bruckner, perfectly sums this up. What existed before Christian remains uncertain, but there is no doubt that his version became the starting point for all subsequent tales of Lancelot as the knight whose extraordinary prowess is inextricably linked to his love for King Arthur's queen. In an attempt to trace the origins of Lancelot as an actual historical figure, one of the best insights can be hidden in his name, and so one way to go is to look at the origin of the words and names in and of themselves. One of the more interesting theories can link Lancelot with some older, pan-European ancient legendary hero. The prominent English historian of the early 20th century, Alfred Anscombe, proposed that the name has Germanic origins. He stated that Lancelot comes from early Germanic Lankloth, with roots in the Old English Lentio, pride, and Lotha, cloak. This in turn he connects with the historical Vinnovillith, a Gothic tribe that supposedly settled in Britain at Vinovia, today Binchester. And as Lancelot can be connected with Binchester, Anscombe's parallel does make some sense. Other scholars argue that the name Lancelot was simply invented by Troyes in his novels, while others propose another interesting theory. It is stated that the name has been derived from Anguizolaus, one of the characters from the pen of Geoffrey of Monmouth, a major figure credited with the development of the legend of King Arthur. Anguizolaus is most likely the anglicized form of the name Unguist, which belonged to the son of a 6th century Pictish king. When transliterated into French it became Anslaus or Lanslaus, and from there, Lancelot emerged. Over time, historians proposed a multitude of possibilities for the origins of the name, and most of them are rooted in actual historical figures of princes and kings. Could Lancelot be a representation of a Celtic deity? But here is the version that has the most credibility, placing Lancelot as firmly rooted in the oldest histories of the British Isles, possibly giving him the identity of an ancient Celtic or pre-Celtic hero or deity that survived through time by becoming a myth. This version was proposed by Roger Sherman Loomis, who was one of the leading scholars of Arthurian myth. His theory states that Lancelot is directly related to Lenliag, Lenliag, roughly pronounced as Lenliaug, that appears in a Welsh story called Culhwch Olwen, and tells of a hero related to the Arthurian story. Here he is connected to the Welsh hero Llwch Lorinauk, Llwch meaning lake. Most agree that this hero is euphemized form of the Celtic deity Luglon Bemj, a major god of the Celtic pantheon. Those are just some of the attempts to prove Lancelot as a hero with real origins. But what of the Arthurian story? In the many medieval legends related to Arthur and his chivalrous knights, Lancelot stands out as the very best of them all. But in a predictable medieval literary twist, love and passion stand in the way, and his chivalry soon becomes blinded. Lancelot is entrusted with the protection of the king's wife, Guinevere. However, her striking beauty could not be resisted. The two fall in love and start an affair. Reason is passion's slave, it is said, and thus Lancelot becomes truly blind to his duty. Madly in love with the young queen, he betrays King Arthur, and so begins a tragic set of events that would lead to the demise of Arthur and the end of his rule. In these stories, Lancelot is no mere upstart or a mystery knight. Like most He too is of noble birth, born as the son of one King Ban of Benwick. Here, again, we can find connections to ancient Welsh mythology, as Ban of Benwick can be connected to Bran le Benoit, the French name for Bran the Blessed, a giant and a king of the Welsh myth, and one of the major figures in the Mabinogion. According to legend, Lancelot is raised not by his parents, but by a mysterious figure widely known as the Lady of the Lake, which is featured prominently in the Arthurian legends. This gives him the title Lancelot of the Lake. It is this lady that prepares the young knight, teaching him all that there is to know before presenting him to the court of King Arthur, where he becomes his noblest knight and the most chivalrous one. Symbolism and virtue in the legend of Lancelot. However, his love for Guinevere stood against all else. Lancelot gives himself entirely over into the service of the lady he loves, alas to the detriment of all his knightly ideals and goals. Also, in accordance to the popular trends of the time, Lancelot exhibits towards her the fine amour, meaning a pure love that was a major attribute of proper chivalric behavior. Nevertheless, throughout the Arthurian cycle, Lancelot is presented with numerous challenges that serve as tests to his chivalry. In one episode, he is seduced and tricked into sleeping with the daughter of the so-called Fisher King, Elaine, while she was pretending to be Guinevere. From this union is born Galahad, another great hero of the Arthurian cycle, who grows up to be an ideal and pure knight. Throughout the development of the story of Lancelot, it becomes clear that increasingly important Christian beliefs come to play a big role in the story. Purity, sinlessness, and penitence all come to characterize this tale. Galahad, sinless and pure, replaces his father who succumbed to his passions and love for Guinevere. As the story progresses, Lancelot's affair with the king's wife completely tears the royal court apart. The supporters of Lancelot and those of King Arthur descend into a bitter and bloody war. When Arthur's treacherous nephew, Mordred, rebelled in Britain, the king fought him as well, and was mortally wounded in a climactic finale. However, by that time, fully aware of their transgressions, both Guinevere and Lancelot go into exile, becoming a nun and a monk respectively. They both devote themselves to this life in seclusion until their death. As one reads the stories of the Arthurian cycle and especially those relating to Lancelot, one can quickly understand the metaphorical focus on symbolism and the development of virtues. Lancelot starts out as a pure and noble knight but succumbs to baser passions and is consumed by an impossible love. However, it is his noble son, Galahad, born of sin, that redeemed his own father and rose to even loftier heights by following a pure and noble lifestyle, rising to become one of the finest knights to ever live. While it is clear that the stories of Lancelot and Galahad were both thoroughly adapted to the Christian and chivalric trends of the Middle Ages, one can still recognize within them a basis that is much more ancient. A basis rooted in the myths and legends of the Celtic mythology. And that is the important part. The story of Lancelot is a remnant of something much greater, of old stories of gods and mortal heroes, of legend and reality intertwined. The unity of Europe's oldest myths, Lancelot as European romantic heritage. But to those with a keen eye, further secrets about the origins of Lancelot could appear. If we consider that the main story of Lancelot, written by Christian de Troyes in the Middle Ages, was greatly fueled and inspired by Christian beliefs dominant at the time, we can quickly see that Troyes might have relied on the Bible for some inspiration in creating the story of Lancelot. One theory suggests that his name means simply Lance, son of Lot, Lance ap Lot in Welsh. As such, his story could be inspired by that of Lot, a figure from the Bible and the Book of Genesis. Much like Lancelot, Lot is tricked into sleeping with women, in this case his own daughters. They bear him 2 sons. Other scholars give him a Germanic origin, connecting him with a historical figure, one Lancelot, also called Landolt, from circa 930 to 991 AD, Count of Woltenberg, Clego, Thurgo, and Lord of Muri. He was the son of the famous Guntram the Rich, a powerful Count of Bratisca of possible Frankish or Burgundian origin, who is considered as a probable progenitor of the House of Habsburg. Either way, the possibilities are numerous, and the truth of Lancelot's origins might never be known. Fact or fiction, Lancelot became one of the unmistakable symbols of the Arthurian legend, and one of the most important figures in European Romantic heritage. Today, he is considered as a mainly English hero, but he is in fact a mythical knight that is a part of the entire pantheon of European history. In many ways Lancelot is the symbiosis of many ancient European myths, whose visage, hazy with age, entwines the real and the imagined, the gods of old and folk heroes of battles long gone and forgotten, becoming part of our shared identity.
Both real and imagined. Absolutely. I mean, while it is probably true that there may never have been the actual character of Lancelot, it's what the story teaches us. And for those that follow me on YouTube and with the Elven Awakenings radio show, you know that I am a lover of parables. Whether the parable itself was of a true event or not, it's the message behind it, what it teaches us. And again, what Lancelot teaches us is to stand by something, pick something to believe in, and to stand by that and to have the integrity to do that. Absolutely beautiful story. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go on to the next story, and what better to go on to then is Guinevere. All right, Guinevere, there again, there is a lot. Whenever you talk about these stories of Camelot, you will notice if you dig deep enough that there's many variations on each and every one of them. There's so many different variations of what was Guinevere. Some say she had black hair. Some say she had blonde hair. Some say she was from Wales. Others say from somewhere else. And the same with Lancelot. Was he from France, or was he a mythical being from Avalon? The stories go on and on. In the end, it's what, while entertaining us is wonderful and to give us that comfort by the fireside, it also stirs our imaginations. You know, as I mentioned before, what stirs our imaginations when we're very young often then sets the road for the rest of our life. You know, I've mentioned before those people who fell in love with Star Trek, very much a fictional show, especially when it first came out. It went on to become astronauts, to become scientists and engineers. They actually went on to make that fantasy real for themselves. And there are out there who so believed in the beauty of Lancelot's, what he stood for, that they personified in themselves, and the same for Guinevere. So we're going to go on to a wonderful little audio clip. And again, I've listened to this YouTube channel so many times, Mythology Dictionary. And the audio clip is called Guinevere, the Enchanting Queen of Camelot. A lot of people will look at her and go, oh, well, how horrible was she, you know, for her faithlessness and her husband, King Arthur. But again, until you've walked in somebody's shoes, it's hard to say, you know, to be able to judge them. But anyway, it's an enchanting tale, and maybe there's a little bit of truth in it for all of us. So, Guinevere, the Enchanting Queen of Camelot by Mythology Dictionary.
Guinevere is the legendary wife of Arthur, the king of the Bretons. Alongside her husband, the queen reigned over England in her utopian Camelot court. She was regarded as one of the world's most beautiful women. In the eyes of some knights of the Round Table, she was certainly the most beautiful of all. The knights' conviction was so immovable that they often challenged to a duel those who dared to say otherwise. And God will be on the side of the right one. Guinevere was the daughter of Leo de Grance, king of the Camelot. He was a friend and fought alongside King Uther Pendragon, Arthur's father. With Uther's death, Leodegrance became accountable for guarding and protecting the famous Round Table. In some versions, Guinevere met Arthur when the latter was severely wounded after his duel against the Black Knight. The princess treated Arthur's wounds, and he fell in love with that figure who resembled nothing short of a goddess. King Arthur married Guinevere after saving her father's castle, which had been besieged by his enemies. Leodegrance handed the Round Table to the Breton king as a wedding gift and became one of his knights. As Arthur's wife, Guinevere was regarded as a role model woman. The queen had countless qualities. She was educated, deeply acquainted with feminine arts, like embroidery, and she was tremendously beautiful. Her beauty brought light to Camelot's court. Such beauty dazzled almost everyone around her, but a knight ended up falling in mad love with his queen. His name was Lancelot. The queen also fell in love with Lancelot, the Round Table's best and most loyal knight. They nourished that platonic love for many years since they loved what they could not have. They remained loyal to the king up until the very moment when their mutual passion could not be contained. The queen became romantically involved with the knight, and they failed to keep that a secret. Mordred, the sneaky knight, denounced the wife's infidelity before Arthur. That propelled a major crisis and a civil war, which destroyed Arthur's kingdom. This crisis ended with Arthur's death, and, feeling the burden of blame, Guinevere decided to live in a convent. Lancelot still attempted to convince her to flee with him, but Guinevere was determined to live the rest of her life in the cloister. The Camelot queen would live in that convent until her demise, without ever forgiving herself for being the cause of the ruin of Arthur's kingdom.
As is so often the case in this world, so many stories end up having such an element of tragedy. But again, if we open our hearts and minds, we can learn something from that tragedy, to gain some wisdom from what they went through, and maybe not repeat it ourselves. Even if it is fantasy, it can happen. So we can all learn from each other, and that's what most of the tragic tales were meant for, was not just to entertain us, but to teach us something about life itself, or at least how we approach life. Well, let's go ahead and take a moment out now, and let's go ahead and return one more time for two more stories, but we're going to turn one more time to that round table, and we're going to go to the head, so to speak, the head of the table, and that was King Arthur himself. I'm going to go ahead and give two stories here. One again is by Mythology Dictionary, and this is King Arthur, the King of Britain. This talks about the legends and myths of King Arthur. And then the second audio clip is going to be a little bit more historical. Some of the truth that may be behind the tale of King Arthur. Was he real? Was there really a Lancelot and Guinevere? Was there actually a Camelot? So we're going to go ahead and introduce King Arthur here a little bit first and talk about the legend itself. And then right after that, we're going to go ahead and this is from Alan Lupuck. We're going to go ahead, and he is the narrator for Is There Any Truth Behind King Arthur? Excellently done. I enjoy it very much. I hope you guys, with all these YouTube channels that I refer to, I hope that you might take an opportunity and go take a look at their channels. They're wonderful, and we all have something to learn. So here we go. This is King Arthur, King of Britain.
Arthur is the legendary King of Britain and the unifier of the Kingdom of England. He was considered the perfect model of a knight. He was good-spirited, kind, honest, and brave. The origin of King Arthur's legend is traced back to Celtic myths, but the influence of Christianity had a crucial role in the edification of King Arthur's image we know today. He was the eldest son of King Uther Pendragon with the Duchess Igraine. But, following the advice of the wizard Merlin, Arthur is raised in secrecy, without anyone knowing that he was King Uther's son. With the king's death, and since Arthur was still quite young, the wizard Merlin trapped the sword of King Uther Pendragon in stone or anvil, depending on the version of the tale, and the one who managed to draw the sword from the stone would be proclaimed the legitimate King of Britain. Many attempted to draw the sword from stone, but the young Arthur was the only one who managed to remove it from the rock, thus becoming King of the Britons. After having the oaths of fidelity from the other noblemen in the region, Arthur began a reign of peace and prosperity, and from the idyllic Camelot, Arthur ruled Britain. In the duel between King Arthur and the Black Knight, Arthur shatters the royal sword, but guided by the wizard Merlin, he is taken to the Lady of the Lake, who presents him with the legendary Excalibur sword. Now wielding his new majestic and magic sword, Arthur became invincible, and he would prove his worth in the battle against the Saxon invasion. The King of Britain married the darling Princess Guinevere and received as a dowry the famous Round Table. There, Arthur had meetings with his most honored knights. Arthur had a half-sister named Morgan, the Fairy of Avalon. According to some versions of the legend, she wanted to usurp her brother's throne and plotted against the king with that intent. King Arthur's demise came from the betrayal of Mordred, his bastard son. They had a duel at the Battle of Camlan. Arthur killed Mordred the traitor, but was fatally wounded. Before his death, Arthur ordered Bedivere to once again throw Excalibur to the Lady of the Lake. Finally, he is taken through the magical land of Avalon. He would rest there, only to return in a time of great need. The debate on the existence of the legendary Arthur is extensive. Scholars indicate that Arthur may have been a military commander who fought alongside the Bretons, but no reliable document mentions Arthur as king of the Bretons. The myths and legends about King Arthur became very popular all over Europe during the Middle Ages. And in the 19th century, with the rise of the artistic movement called Romanticism, the Arthurian legends once again became popular. As a matter of fact, the stories of Arthur, the King of Bretons, and his knights continue to marvel the new generations of today.
All right, we're going to go ahead again, and the second clip is going to be from Is There Any Truth Behind the Stories of King Arthur by Alan Lupuck. Again, going to go into the actual history of it. Really fascinating to know that maybe some of this was true. Anyway, here we go. Hope you enjoy it.
Here lies Arthur, king who was and king who will be. So reads the inscription on King Arthur's gravestone in Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur. Writing in the 15th century, Malory couldn't have known how prophetic this inscription would turn out to be. King Arthur has risen again and again in our collective imagination, along with his retinue of knights, Guinevere, the Round Table, Camelot, and of course, Excalibur. But where do these stories come from? And is there any truth to them? King Arthur, as we know him, is a creation of the later Middle Ages, but his legend actually has its roots in Celtic poetry from an earlier time, the Saxon invasions of Britain. After the Romans left Britain in 410 CE, Saxon invaders from what's now Germany and Denmark quickly capitalized on the vulnerability of the abandoned territory. The inhabitants of Britain fought fiercely against the invaders through several centuries of turmoil. There are hardly any written records from this time, so it's difficult to reconstruct an accurate history. However, surviving poetry from the era gives us some clues. One of the poems, the Gododin, contains the very first reference to Arthur, though Arthur himself doesn't actually appear in it. It says a different warrior, named Guarda, was skilled at slaying his enemies, but was no Arthur. That's not much to go on. But whoever this Arthur was, he must have been the gold standard of warriors. Whether he ruled anyone, or even lived at all, is unfortunately less clear. Despite this uncertainty, references to Arthur caught the attention of an aspiring historian hundreds of years later. In 1130, Geoffrey of Monmouth was a lowly cleric with grand ambitions. Using Celtic and Latin sources, he spent years creating a lengthy chronicle titled The History of the Kings of Britain. The centerpiece of this tome was King Arthur. History is a generous term for Geoffrey's account. Writing 600 years after the Saxon invasions, he cobbled together fragments of myth and poetry to compensate for the almost complete lack of official records. A few of his sources contained mentions of Arthur, and some others were realistic accounts of battles and places. But many featured mythic heroes fighting long odds with the help of magical swords and sorcery. Geoffrey blended them all. A magical sword called Camelot and a Roman fortress called Camelot appeared in his source material. So Geoffrey's Arthur ruled from Camelot and wielded Caliburnus, the Latin translation of Calfra. Geoffrey even added a wise counselor named Merlin, based on the Celtic bard Myrddin, to Arthur's story. If Arthur did live, he would likely have been a military leader, but a castle-bound king better fit Geoffrey's regal history. Geoffrey's chronicle got the attention he had hoped for, and was soon translated from Latin into French by the poet Wace around 1155 CE. Wace added another centerpiece of Arthurian lore to Geoffrey's sword, castle, and wizard, the Round Table. He wrote that Arthur had the table constructed so that all the guests in his court would be equally placed, and none could boast that he had the highest position at the table. After reading Wace's translation, another French poet, Chrétien de Troyes, wrote a series of romances that catapulted Arthur's story to fame. He introduced tales of individual knights like Lancelot and Gawain, and mixed elements of romance in with the adventurers. He conceived Arthur, Lancelot, and Guinevere's love triangle. In addition to interpersonal intrigue, he also introduced the Holy Grail. Chrétien probably based his Grail's powers on magical objects in Celtic mythology. He lived in the middle of the Crusades, and others imposed the preoccupations of the time on the Grail, casting it as a powerful relic from the crucifixion. Numerous adaptations in French and other languages followed from Chrétien's work. In the course of these retellings, Caerleon became Camelot, and Caliburnus was rechristened Excalibur. In the 15th century, Sir Thomas Malory synthesized these stories in Le Morte d'Arthur, the basis of many modern accounts of King Arthur. In the 1,000 years since Arthur first appeared in a Celtic poem, his story has transformed over and over to reflect the concerns of his chroniclers and their audiences. And we're still rewriting and adapting the legend today. Whether or not the man ever lived, loved, reigned, or adventured, it's undeniable that the character has achieved immortality.
I'd like to go ahead and now share a beautiful elven poem. Again, we have shared many of hers before, and this is by Eru Anna. And that, again, means a gift of God, and I totally agree with that. She's out of Estonia, and this is another elven poem of hers based on the Tolkien lore. So for those of you who know something about Tolkien, you'll understand a bit of the poem if you don't understand all the words. As far as the names and places, just if you would, just listen to the poem itself and to the beauty that it maybe will bring to mind. All right, again, thank you, Adriana, for a beautiful poem. This is called Journey of the Teleri. The sea, birds wail upon the shore. Our kin are gone, but still we hear the gulls that cry, our fate. Is there no isle to bring us to Valinor? Has longing come too late? We listen closely and we hear the music in those cries. They whisper secret lore of craft of ships we could devise. The sea, birds wail upon the shore. Urmo's island has returned to bear us west. How fair the forest of Valinor, and sweet the light of day. but fairer still are ships like swans on this island where we'll stay. Thank you so much, Adriana. That was just a beautiful picture that it gave to me. All right. I hope you all enjoyed it. Again, thank you, Adriana. Well, that's it, my Elven, Fae, and other kin family. I hope you enjoyed the few tales that we told today and the poem. The purpose to all this is to remind us of the past and to help bring some myth and magic back into our days today, back into our lives, so that it's not all completely forgotten. As always, thank you for listening, my friends, and until we are together again next week, may you all be blessed by the elves. My name is Dr. Erendil Spendalelas, and I am the Elven Scholar. Namarie. When you go to college, you expect the high halls and libraries filled with old books. But much has changed, and in today's world, online schools have exploded in popularity. Please join us at Lambengomor, the world's first online college with a nod towards elven and humankind alike. With Lambengomor, you can start a new career or a new life in the holistic health field. Learn a new elven language, study history and culture or the environment. We believe everyone deserves an affordable education with personalized attention. We provide full certifications in the following fields: home herbalist, Reiki levels 1 through Reiki Master, nutritionist, first aid, Elven history and culture, Elven languages, Quenya and Sindarin, anatomy, botany, introduction to archaeology, ecology, astronomy, and Elven laws of manifestation and meditation. We also offer full diplomas in the fields of medical herbalist and medical nutritionist. More classes are being added. Many students have already found new careers in these fields. You can pay for your classes outright or join a low-cost monthly subscription which allows you to take as many classes as you like at one time while you maintain the subscription. This college was founded to give you a chance to expand your horizons while believing in who you are. All classes are certified and are aimed at helping you start a new life and a new career. Adult study programs for both elves and humans alike, designed specifically for you. You can find us at www.elvenscholar.org. Discover what is inside of you. Be who you are at Lambengomor, the Elven School of Lore Masters.